All right, Coalition Purple back on the air.
Yeah, good to see you
John,
again. Been a little while.
it has. It has. Last week was crazy. This week's every week's crazy. So, but sorry I missed last week. But here we are. So what's
Yeah.
going on?
Well, basically, I mean, I'm sure you'll remember this. After we got off the air and finished the cast with Dick Lucas, we started to have a little bit of a conversation about Prop 50. And it was kind of an interesting conversation, and he recommended that we talk about it the next time we were on. So
Here
I
you
figured we
go.
should talk about it. So first thing first, Prop 50 is the ballot initiative in California to attempt to redraw the district lines for the state of California, theoretically in response to Texas's redistricting, but really, I think more or less just because Gavin Newsom feels like doing it. So that's sort of the first part of it. And then, I mean, for the record, I'm going to vote. I mean, as a Californian, I'm going to vote no on it. And I can give my reasons in a minute. And when we had the last discussion, I think you were sort of undecided and maybe leaning towards voting for it. So is that still
Yep.
the case?
Yeah. I ended up voting for it, and but I would tell you I was very ambivalent about it, and I can go into my reasons of why I ended up that way. But I'd love to hear yours first.
So the first thing is that my feeling about Prop 50 is very simple, in that it's entirely unconstitutional. And I actually said this to Dick when we were talking before, and that is that I'm actually not as concerned about whether it will or won't pass, but as to whether or not the courts will uphold it, because the California Constitution, or as it stands right now, the state of California's Constitution says that the Independent Redistricting Commission shall redraw the districts. And so, since this is not the independent district committee drawing the districts, is Gavin Newsom and his cronies, the courts should throw it out as unconstitutional, because they can't just up and redraw districts and ignore the existence of the redistricting commission. So I'm going to vote no on it, but I honestly don't care how much, whether or not it passes. What I care is what happens in the courts. And so
Right.
that's sort of my thinking on it right now. It's black letter law, unconstitutional, should be thrown out by the courts, and then what happens with the voting happens. So I'll let it over to you for your thoughts on it.
Well, and no, I totally agree. I guess the theory from a legal standpoint, well, I guess we'll soon find out, is that because they are putting it up to the vote of the people, that like any other potential bill, that would sort of circumvent the whole constitutional issue of it. But who knows, right?
Well, my
Um,
feeling about that, I just want
every
to, I
time
mean,
I think something's really clear, from a constitutional standpoint, it's like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. Okay, so whatever.
here's the thing: if they were putting it on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, which would have a
Yeah,
much higher
right.
threshold to get it on the ballot, and they wouldn't have
Yep,
been able to do it so quickly, then I wouldn't have a
right.
problem with it. Look, if Californians decide that they want to vote to change the Constitution so that they get rid of the districting committee and Gavin Newsom can do the districts any way he wants, then that's the business of the people of California. But the thing is, they didn't put it on as a
Right.
constitutional
Yep.
amendment. So even if it passes as a ballot measure, if it's still unconstitutional, it's still unconstitutional. So it should still get thrown out by the courts. But again, we'll have to see what happens. But that's, as I say, that's still kind of my thinking.
Yeah, well, and that's just what's been so interesting over the last couple of years. I think there's been so many, creative ways of looking at the law, and I'm
Yeah,
talking about state and federal both, that never even entered, I think, most people's minds. You know, that again, nothing really surprises me. I totally hear what you're saying on your premise on that, and yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense to me. Um, but then the flip side of it for me, what just kind of pushed me over the edge one way or the other. Well, number one, I guess we're going to cancel out each other's votes. So, I mean,
yeah,
what
I tend to
what
do that a lot.
happens, right? So it's like, so what happens if it literally comes down to one vote or something? Because I don't think we're unusual. I mean, I think that a lot of people are very much on the fence about it. It's like, wait a minute. kind of like we were talking before, this is where California, in doing, I think, trying to do the right thing by having the commission, really has shot itself in the foot, since not everybody's playing with the same rules, right, in terms of the
Exactly.
redistricting.
Yeah.
And that's what I ultimately came down to. It was like, well, you know, if people are going to continue to play around and jury rig all this stuff, it does put us at a disadvantage, whether you agree with it or not. So, but believe me, I it was a gut punch in terms of really doing it. But that was really the only reason. And what's going to be interesting more so, and I agree with you, whichever way it goes, it almost doesn't matter to me either. Um, but what's going to be interesting to me is because when I actually checked into my friendly AI bot and asked the question, and it took a really long time to come up with this answer, um, that if every Democrat leaning state maximizes all of the gerrymandering it can, what would that mean? Because it's basically a response to Texas, right? And it basically can, well, there's a lot of variables and all that kind of stuff in terms of, how things are in basically the likely scenario was Democrats could win between 260 and 300 seats, and you only need 218, right, to control the House. So it's like, Republicans may ultimately end up regretting going down this road, because if every state that's either left leaning or right leaning does these kind of shenanigans, Republicans could probably end up in the losing end of the situation over the course of the next few years. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Well, it's interesting that you did that search because what a lot of people are saying that I've seen is that if all the states, all the Republican states redistrict maximally, and all the Democrat states redistrict maximally, the Republicans would pick up something like 13 seats in the House. Because if you look at what's actually happening right now, like there's only one state right now that's the Democrats that's redistricting, and it's California. And California is slated to pick up maybe, I think, 2 seats if they do the redistricting. But the thing is, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Ohio, I think maybe one of the Dakotas, and there's a whole bunch of red states set to redistrict. And if you really look at the blue states right now, Massachusetts, New Mexico, and there's a few
New
others I don't
York,
remember them off the top of my head. They already don't have any Republican seats. So the trouble that the Democrats are going to find themselves in is they've already maxed out. Like Illinois maxed out, Massachusetts
California is pretty
maxed out.
close.
Yeah, and California's only going to get 2. So if it comes down to all the states redistricting to maximally gerrymander, then my understanding is that the Republicans will come out ahead in that fight. But again, this is all people making estimates of how things will or won't go.
Exactly, and that's what came back was there's so many basic scenarios that you could come up with that it's really kind of hard to say, because with the gerrymandering, but it is going to just start this big turf war is what my fear is, and it takes us, regardless of the outcome, it's going to take us backwards to where I think the vast majority of people want to get to, where it's like they should be picking who's representing them, not having representatives pick who's going to vote for them,
Right. Yeah.
and that's what's happening in all these states. And it's just a sad scenario. So, but I guess we'll see.
But I also, because now that we're on that part of the topic, because there's a few more very interesting aspects that are going to come up with this redistricting thing. But the first thing is my feeling has always been that there's basically 3 scenarios of about how the redistricting goes. One, nobody is gerrymandering. That's the optimal place. We all want to be there where you just have fair districts and nobody's gerrymandering. The next best outcome, as far as I'm concerned, is everybody gerrymanders.
Right.
Because the worst outcome, in my
Yes.
opinion, is that one side gerrymanders and uses that to their advantage, and the other side tries to, play it fair. And then, if in that scenario, you're essentially rewarding the bad actors, for their gerrymandering. So as things are going now, and it's going to turn into everybody gerrymandering. since nobody gerrymandering isn't going to happen, and one side gerrymandering and the other side not is the worst outcome, everybody gerrymandering might be the best outcome available to us at this point in time.
Well, it's probably the most realistic one, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because nobody wants to give up what they think is a perceived advantage. And, and in looking at, you just look at California, um, and I know everybody's kind of pointing at Texas right now because they kind of started the war here, but Texas is not as gerrymandered as California.
Yeah, Texas has the capacity to pick up something like 5 seats, I think, if they really went to the wall.
Yeah, I mean, California is, even though we have this, and that's where I guess that was sort of part of my thought on voting for it, because when I look, even though we have this allegedly independent commission, California is really gerrymandered
Yeah,
compared to
pretty good.
the actual voter rolls, even though Republicans are, quite a ways down in terms of number. Um, if you just did pure math on how they should be represented, they would have, I don't know, it was like at least 6 or 7 more seats than they do now. I mean,
Yeah,
California is really gerrymandered.
gerrymandered
And,
already.
I mean, that's just something we all have to, again, as a recovering Democrat, you got to admit that, yeah, Texas, I don't
Pretty
like
much
what they're
does.
doing. I don't like what they're doing, but, you don't throw stones if you live in a glass house, right?
But so moving on from that, there's some more interesting factors that are going to, I think, factor greatly into what happens with Prop 50. And that is there are two federal lawsuits working their way up through the courts as we speak. So the first one I want to address is a lawsuit saying that the 2020 census was calculated improperly. So what the lawsuit wants to do is it wants to throw out the population count that the 2020 census came up with and use the data gathered, use different methods of calculation, which is basically no methods of calculation, to just do a raw vote count to redo the districts for the entire nation. And the thing is, if that goes through, then California would lose 2 seats in the House, at least according to the math of the people that are making the lawsuit. So if that happens, so let's say Prop 50 passes and you get all these nice shiny new districts, but then the Supreme Court holds up the lawsuit about the census. Well, 2 of those districts are going to have to go away immediately. So whatever lines got drawn by Prop 50 could be immediately invalidated, a day later by having to redo the census count.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next one,
Yeah. Well, and again,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, please.
No, all I was going to say is I'm hoping this maybe forces some rationalization of it. Either, like you said, everybody just starts to gerrymander, and I think that is more the likely outcome, or we get to a point where, particularly today with today's technology, we should be able to figure out how to equally divide up all the population centers versus rural areas in a more fair fashion and take it out of the hands of humans, basically. Because as long as humans are involved, it's probably going to get screwed up.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you there. And honestly, part of that is what sort of irks me about Prop 50 in the first place is like a nonpartisan commission versus an AI to make decisions, is probably, kind of in the vein of what we want. And since California already has that, it just strikes me as a real shame to just gut it and say, well, okay, it makes the
No, I
decision
agree.
for these lines. And then a week later, the legislature comes along and draws different lines. And it's like, well, then
Yeah.
what's the point of it? So
Yeah.
that's kind of also sort of why I would rather not see that happen, because I actually think California is, at least in some sense, attempting to do
Yes.
things the right way. So it would be
Yeah.
nice to at least make an effort in that direction, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. No, I know. No, and I think it was all with good intentions, even though I still kind of question the results even coming out of the commission. But I think the intent was right, is right. But again, you're shooting yourself in the foot. If nobody else goes along with playing the game by the same set of the rules, it's like, okay, it's good you're holding towards the principle. I get it, but
But
you're going to
yes,
end up screwing yourself,
look
right?
over, right?
So
I
I
no,
don't
yeah,
know.
I agree. But anyway, so on to the next thing. So the next thing that's also interesting is the Supreme Court is set to rule on the Voting Rights Act that's talking about the creation of majority minority districts. So, and this I think is principally in the South,
Yes.
where districts were required to be drawn to give a sort of proportional representation to minorities, specifically blacks, because this is, post Civil War stuff. And so there's a lot of districts looming around that were specifically drawn to give minority um, representation in
Mhm.
Congress.
Right.
So if the Supreme Court comes along and says, look, you can't use race as a basis to decide how to make a district, all of the majority minority districts would evaporate in a puff of smoke, and you would have to redraw all the districts that involved that sort of thinking. In California, I haven't actually been able to figure out if there's something explicitly that is a majority minority district that was, that used racial criteria to make the district. So I'm not sure if that will affect California. But again, let's say it does. Let's say there is at least one majority minority district that's drawn in California, or I should say, not just drawn in California as it stands now, but it was created for Prop 50. If that comes along, then again, Prop 50 gets thrown out because it can't have these racial districts. So there's literally three lawsuits working their way through the courts that could all void Prop 50, which is kind of why I'm sort of sitting at neutral as far as like, well, I mean, with all this going on, is Prop 50 really going to matter at all? So we'll have to see.
Yeah, well, and the whole premise of about the Supreme Court decision coming up on the whole, can you have these minority majority districts? I don't see how any gerrymandering doesn't the race doesn't play a point to some degree in most of them, only because of just where people lean, politically, depending on that, right? So um, it's going to be. I mean, in one respect, I kind of see where they're kind of just like calling it for what it is. That you can say all your gerrymandering isn't racially motivated, but reality is a lot of it is just because of the way the voter rolls kind of shake out in terms of who's a Democrat and who's a Republican. So it's this. I don't know. Again, I keep going back to, and I like what you're saying. I think maybe we just try and get to the point where everybody gerrymanders the heck out of everything, and we just call
Everybody's
it for
playing by
what
the
it
same set
is.
of
I
rules,
mean,
man, at least.
until somebody wakes up and enough people wake up and just say this is ridiculous, and if we're truly supposed to have a representative democracy, let's truly create something that does that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, the whole idea of a republic, is that, we vote for our representatives who go to Washington to represent the people. And with all the gerrymandering and the way that it's done, that's just not happening. So, I mean, do we have? I mean, I live in Los Angeles. Do I have any political representation? I mean, no, not at all. But the last thing I'd throw in there about the majority minority districts is that I think the lawsuit originated in Louisiana, and I think they have districts in Louisiana that are explicitly, spelled out as created to be the majority minority districts. And I think if you have districts that have some racial disparity, I don't think that's the same thing. I think you have to have districts that are expressly, decided for those very specific reasons. And that's why I haven't been able to figure out whether the districts in Prop 50 have anything to do with that, because I haven't found any explicit language saying
I
this
don't think so.
district we're making here is for this reason. So I'm not sure how
Yeah,
that.
I think they all fall under that was kind of the core of the Civil Right or the Voting Rights Act, was to carve that out. So there was some representation that they could never get. And so at the time it was like they had to force it basically, right? So
Yeah,
now the question, because otherwise there was never going to be any chance for it. And so now the question is have we truly come far enough that you don't need that kind of, because it was so focused on the South. That's where
right.
most of that, I mean, whatever,
Was coming
however
out.
many states it was, 7 or 8 states or whatever, right? So it was like, so that changes things fundamentally for sure
Yeah,
if it
and
happens. And I
and
think
then
it's going to happen.
yeah, well, it's all the pundits think that the Supreme Court is gonna throw out those type of districts because they've already thrown out all the affirmative action stuff that's come across
Exactly.
lately. So it's
Yeah.
unlikely that will
Yeah.
last. But the last part of it is because I always like to throw this in because we're the third party guys. Think about how much more complicated it would be to gerrymander if there were three parties involved instead of two. I mean, the way gerrymandering basically works is, the party in power looks to draw districts to exclude, where the other people's votes are. But if you had a third party whose voters were intermingled, at an individual level throughout all of these different districts, well, you wouldn't be able to gerrymander them away. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to go neighborhood by neighborhood to gerrymander them away because you would have different groups of people voting for different things. And if you had 5 or 6 parties that were all viable, then gerrymandering would literally just be completely impossible. And so again, this is another thing where, there's all these complexities around it and all these interesting things that you can talk about. But if you just had one more viable party, all this gerrymandering stuff would just explode in everyone's face.
Yeah. Well, and we harp on this all the time. All the more reason why people need to be independents, move away from these two parties. Because ultimately, I mean, in an ideal world, you would like, me personally, I would like to see every district be a toss up district. You're
Yes.
not sure how it's going to go because it's because that would indicate that you truly have a representative group of people that are, speaking truth to power, as they say. And the only way to get there, at least at this point, is either through everybody starts gerrymandering, or we get to the point where there's enough independents, even without a party, that actually vote based on the issues. I think the party part of it just doubles the power of that. To your point, but even before we get there, the more people that are not registered Democrat or Republic puts the onus on those people who are running to incorporate them into their thinking. And today it's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to deregistering too, which is something that we said, deregister from Republican or Democrat, re-register as an independent or, no
Yep.
party
No
preference.
party preference.
And then,
Yep.
it's going to be much more difficult for the gerrymanderers to have a great idea about, who's where and, how are we going to gerrymander this district. Because if you have huge swaths of people registered as independent voters, you may think it's safe to gerrymander because of voting patterns, but
Right.
it'd be hard to
You don't
say that
know.
for sure. So
Yep.
the more you have to try and concentrate people into an area to ensure that it's safe, the more districts that are going to have more people that are likely to vote in opposite directions and therefore make competitive districts. You may end up with some ultra safe gerrymandered places, but you also might end up with a lot of competitive districts. And again, as far as the gerrymandering goes, I would say that's preferable to, essentially the assuredness that we have right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. No, that's great. So, what else you been thinking about? I've got one other topic, but you sound like you had a long list today.
Well, no, I had a long list of things relating to to Prop 50.
Gerrymandering.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
that that's pretty much burned me out. So take it away.
Well, no. Well, I just wanted to bring up because I know you'll be a fan of this since it was just signed by your favorite governor. Uh, but the Senate Bill 79, which is now basically taking out of local control, basically state mandates now that within quarter mile to a half mile radius of mass transit stations, whether it's buses or trains or
Hmm.
whatever, they
Yeah.
can now go up to as high as I think 8 stories or something to create affordable housing, which again, even if they some do that, by the time they've already had those incentives in place already, and they literally the number of affordable housing units has really gone hardly anywhere. I mean, it's just not done it. So now that the mandate is taken, basically taking local control out of it altogether. I mean, if you're within like a half a mile and you're a developer, go 8 stories, and you have to sprinkle in a few low income houses there, but and with the premise that we'll get people to transportation of mass transit, and so they can go to work and stuff from the Sprinter or whatever coaster train or whatever. And again, this is one of those things where I think good intentions are in place, and it kind of does make some logical sense if we actually had a really good mass transit system, but
Yeah,
we
which we
don't.
don't. Well,
I was
I
like,
think that
I was like, have you? And I always want to ask those people that are in favor of it, it's like, have you actually tried to go anywhere? Which I have.
yeah,
I've
me
tested
too.
it several times. Trying to get literally from your wherever you live, get to a train station or a central bus station or something, because we are such a suburban world here. And it's not New York City. It's not Washington, D.C. It's not the Bay Area. The Bay Area actually has some pretty
Yeah,
decent
part.
mass transit.
Yeah,
But and I don't see it happening anytime soon.
yeah. Well, I think there's actually even it, I think couched in the good idea of having housing near transportation is a more sinister portion of it, and which is being demonstrated right now in Los Angeles. So in LA, since this has happened, they're going to put in bus stops in the burned areas of where the wildfires were in the Palisades and places like that, so that the developers can buy up that land and build housing in the burned areas, which is going to change that
Collection of
area
it. Yeah.
forever. I mean,
Yeah.
that the Palisades, that part of Southern California, is now gone forever. And so it basically what it means is it's this premium land that can be bought up at cheap prices because of the disaster and can then be turned into housing, which people may or
Yeah.
may not want. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I always, when it comes, like you say, my favorite governor, when it comes to Newsom, it's always about how is he going to get kickbacks from the developers? Where can he get the developers to develop so that he can get the kickbacks? Because it's part of the whole housing first model. It's like we have so much homelessness in California, but so much of it is related to drug addiction and mental health issues
Yeah.
and
Right.
things like that. But they don't care. They never look at those things. That doesn't matter. What matters is, can I get these guys to build something and give me a kickback? And there was also recently, it's funny that you brought this up. The new federal attorney for the California uh, just recently brought charges against the developer who was not building the things he was supposed to build. He took millions of dollars, apparently paid off
Hmm.
his American Express card with those millions of dollars. And, it's basically just part of the kickback scheme. You have some awful human being acting as a developer, lying to people, and it's all fraud. And so again, hopefully there'll be some investigation into who's getting these contracts, but I don't trust Newsom for anything.
I would have never guessed that. And again, I mean, on so many of these things, I mean, I do think there's some good intentions, but the good intentions just get lost in the actual execution of it. And it's like there's just not any creative thinking. And I always go back to back in the 40s and 50s when, and Lord knows I don't propose having another world war, but back in those days, that big things did happen. I mean, you think about all the infrastructure that was created, all those kinds of things that were done literally almost overnight in some cases. And the closest thing that I've seen happen like that recently was, I think it was in Pennsylvania when the ship hit that one bridge and they had to knock it all down and rebuild, and they like rebuilt it in a couple weeks. I mean, because it was such a vital, you know, link for the corridor there. And so it is absolutely possible to get these things done, but we've lost the ability to think that way as a society in many ways,
But I
because we
also
get all balled up in all these other issues. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I definitely want to protect the environment and all those things, but there's got to be a quicker and easier way of doing that without getting it into, 10 years worth of environmental studies.
I also think that, sometimes when you look at what the capacity to get things done actually is, like you say, like the getting the bridge built in Pennsylvania, sort of points up the sinister nature of some of the things that are going on in California, like the high speed rail is like the perfect example of it. We know for a fact that as people in a society, we are capable of building railroad tracks, but the railroad tracks don't get built. If they wanted to build railroad tracks, they would put all of their power, focus, money, and effort into building railroad tracks. But they do not do that. All they want to do is keep the program alive so it continues to be funded so that they continue to get kickbacks. And that's why I say it's very sinister, because it can be done. We all know that it's possible to build railroad tracks. So then you just have to ask yourself, why are there no railroad tracks?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, with all my, progressive friends, that's kind of where I'm at on it. It's like, I, I don't think, and that's where the big majority in the middle, the independent thinkers, need to become truly independent, because I think that so many of these things are not a right left thing, a Democrat Republican thing. It's just, hey, this is just dumb. We can do this. We do want to save the environment. We do want to have better transportation. We do want more infrastructure, but we're not, we don't have the wherewithal to figure out a creative way of getting that done with, and that doesn't mean you can't have one without the other. You can build infrastructure quickly and
Yeah,
not destroy the environment. I
yeah,
fundamentally believe that that's true.
I do too.
I don't think anybody's advocating for, destroying the environment to put in the railroad tracks.
Yeah, no, as I say, I just always feel like, you could have a better educational system. There are better educational systems all over the world, but we don't do it. We could have a better healthcare system. There are better healthcare systems around the world. And at least our healthcare system could certainly be more efficient. We don't do it. We could have a better tax code. We could have better environmental policy. We could have better roads. We could have, almost anything, but somehow it never gets done. There's always a demand for more money, which goes somewhere, but the things that people wanted that money used for never get done.
Well, unfortunately, it's all being driven by the duopoly that exists out there. So, we'll end it with that. Just encourage everybody to deregister
Yeah, yeah.
from those parties, and really start turning the crank on all
Independent
this,
movement.
because it's in our hands, really. Yep. All right, man. We'll leave it there for now.
That was a fun one. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.